Hello, everybody. Thank you for your attendance. We'll go ahead and get the session started today. Most likely, we will not need the full hour, so hopefully we can buy you back some time. But appreciate you all joining us for this session on leveraging technology to assure 889B compliance. I'm Tom Leahy. I am the SVP of Sales and Business Development with SureShield. We are a solution provider in the risk, security, and compliance sectors. I'm joined on the call by our CEO, Sanjay Kumar, and our CTO, Chandi Bilagu, who will be participating and help answering questions at the end of the session. I will primarily conduct the majority of the content delivery here. The three of us combined have probably close to 70 years of experience in the security, compliance, and risk areas. And we know that this particular issue today is certainly top of mind for any of those who are serving any type of government contract. So we'll talk a little bit about the McCain Act, the intent of that act, and what that means. It means for you, or if you're a provider who is serving any type of government contract, the entities that you are forbidden or banned from working with, some process and their subsidiaries, as well as processes to employ to get this started, to help identify in your own ecosystem what you have, and making sure that you're not working with any of these particular entities, and if so, putting a plan to remove those companies. And then we're going to show you some ways in which you can leverage technology to help ease that compliance burden. And we'll give you a product demonstration of that through a offering we have through SureShield called Integrity Manager for 889B compliance. We'll take on any questions. And then for all of those who are participating today, we are offering a free trial of the solution as well. So please note in your Zoom meeting, there is an area for chat. There's also a Q&A area at the conclusion of the session. We will ask, certainly field any questions that you may have, and then wrap up the session as well. And all of you will receive the content of this presentation as well as a recording of this presentation as well. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Many of you, I hope, are familiar with the McCain Act. It was enacted back in August of 2018, really with the intent of preventing espionage and stealing of very critical, important national security information. And it really was generated through a number of very significant cyber attacks and cyber stealing that had taken place, primarily through the use of telecommunication equipment, phones, video, routers, and the like of that process. And because of the severity of this act was passed, and with Congress's focus on increasing privacy, security, and reducing espionage risk from telecommunication providers. And quite honestly, those are ones that are owned or controlled by the Chinese government at this time. So the primary motivation around it was issues that we were having with Chinese stealing of critical information. Like any types of programs, and knowing what has taken place in the last few years, not just with governments like China, but with North Korea, Iran, Russia, you can be pretty assured that this act and some of the provisions of this act very well could be expanded. So what are those provisions? The 889A provision, which was first put in place, forbade the government itself from obtaining through any kind of contract or other instrument the certain telecommunication equipment and services produced by these Chinese companies. So at one time, obviously there was direct contracting and use of products and service offerings from these companies that were affiliated with the Chinese government and led to a significant amount of damage from stealing critical and national security information. In August of last year, during the pandemic, this was expanded and probably always intended to be, but because of issues with the pandemic as well, leading to a lot more cyber issues, that effective of in 2020, last summer, they expanded this, indicating that not only can the government not contract, but the government can't contract with any subcontractors who are providing, who have any of this equipment in their environment. So any of you who may be directly serving or serving through a subcontract, as the Act stands, you are forbidden and from having any of these companies or their subsidiaries equipment in your environment. And the interesting part of this is that's regardless of whether that is in use in the performance of a federal contract. So I've made, I guess a more simple example. Let's say I was a contractor that provided services that included maybe handling all the gardening and lawn maintenance for the White House. So I basically go in and I cut the lawn and I trim the trees and the legs. If my company or my company itself was using any of this equipment, having nothing to do with the services I'm providing, I'm still banned from doing that. So the end point is, regardless of whether it's part of the services you deliver as a service, the fact or mere fact that if you have this in your environment, you are supposed to be removing it if you want to continue to serve those contracts or bid on any new contracts. So it applies to every sector, no matter what your company makes or sells. And as a provider in this, it's upon you, it's written upon you that you must be doing checks and check to make sure that you don't have any of this prohibited telecommunication equipment or services in your environment. And really that should be also pushed down to any of your downstream vendors in your ecosystem who may be providing services as well. So it's a pretty serious matter. And of course, it's a pretty big undertaking. And again, as we pointed out, it applies no matter if you use it in or outside of the federal domain. If it's used outside and has nothing to do with the contract, it doesn't matter. You have to remove it or put actions in place to remove it. And as stated, the failure to comply properly will result in lost contracts, inability to bid on contracts, and most likely in the future, there'll be some significant fines associated with this, as our government is wont to do. So it's a pretty significant new act. If you are a supplier, you need to be complying with this act. You need to attest that you're complying with this act, and make sure that you've done the proper things to ensure that you don't have these in your environment. So today, as of today, these are the 5 primary agencies or companies that are banned. And with those companies, they have over 230 different affiliates or subsidiaries. And what makes this an even more dynamic and difficult process is the fact that there will, with no doubt, be more companies added to this. As I mentioned before, it's primarily focused on the on China, but that doesn't mean it will not get extended to other potentially hostile companies or countries. And this list of entities that are banned will continue to grow, and it's not unusual that many of them will begin to operate or start new affiliates or subsidiaries. So while that number is 230 today, it's already expected that this could be close to doubling in the very near future. So being able to monitor that is not a simple process. So what do you need to do as a provider? What is recommended that you do? As we said, failure to comply with this can result in a canceled or lost contracts, and we don't want that to happen. So the first and most important thing that you as a provider do is make sure that you go in and review and understand the rules and actions associated with Section 88 and 889, particularly 889B as it relates to providers to that, to the ecosystem. You should be conducting a system review of all of your vendors and all of those within that list to determine if your company uses uses any of this telecommunication equipment or services or companies that are in that environment. And it's not really that simple a process. There's a lot of different areas you need to go to try to understand who those banned companies are. But keep in mind, just knowing the company, they also have several different types of products associated with that company. So having a proper inventory of your ecosystem needs to be done. And then if you are identifying, or you do evaluate or identify that there are entities in your ecosystem that are associated with those organizations, it's up to you then to evaluate the cost for removing them. Is the contract that you have important enough to you to get them out? Are you willing to sacrifice that contract because you need that for conducting other business? Most likely, a lot of these groups are going to want to figure out ways to replace that with other things that would not put them in that type of a bind. There is the ability to pursue a waiver while you implement a phase-out plan, but it's very unlikely unless you have a really, really strong argument that they're going to allow that waiver to stand. And it's important that you work with, if those of you who are on this call are not in the compliance area but have some oversight of this, educating your employees on this provision is very important, because oftentimes just not knowing can lead to unintentional use, right? And even to the extent you could have employees who are purchasing this type of equipment for their own use, and that itself is still something that needs to be identified and known. And then, of course, when you're responding to any orders under your GSA contract, you are required to think of this as a test or represent whether you're using any of this or not. So there's information that has to be reported to the System for Award Management, the SAM, at sam.gov. So it's, how you go about that can be a difficult process. We've talked with a number of folks who are using spreadsheets or Excel spreadsheets. They're taking an inventory, they're trying to match that up, and then do the best they can to make sure that they don't have this in place. And as I mentioned before, this is not a static process as well. So anytime new services or equipment is introduced into your environment, that should be checked against to make sure, and also check to make sure that there's no new entities or subsidiaries that have been added to that list. So that is really the provision. It's something that you have to do. It's not a voluntary type thing. It's something that's required to be done. They are giving you I would say, the honor of saying that you've done this and you're attesting that you've done this. However, like a lot of these groups, they will again expand. So there's just as an example, if any of you are servicing the Department of Defense as part of a contract, you're familiar with the new CMMC requirements, accreditation requirements that are coming out. They initially started with a security assessment that you were expected to do on your own, submit to the government and say that you were following certain security practices. And because they were having continued problems with that, they stepped it up one step further to now have a third party that's going to come in and audit this. So while this today is an attestation process, you can probably be assured that it will get expanded to something even with more teeth around it. So having proper processes in place to begin with is important. And I think there was a question about, are we going to get a copy of this presentation? Yes, for those of you who are participating, this presentation as well as the recording of the presentation will be going out to you. So I'm going to pause and actually go in and show you a solution that we provide through our company, SureShield. We have a number of different types of solutions that help organizations maintain compliance, particularly a number of those that are compliant with federal requirements, tools that can help assure security and prevent cyber attacks and the like. But we're going to focus today a little bit on a product called Integrity Shield, and particularly Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. And what does this technology do? As I mentioned, it comes under the domain of our platform called Integrity Shield. What the system will do is we have aggregated all of the data on the banned entities, the companies, and the subsidiaries of those companies. And we have them monitored in a database that we're continuously updating. What you will do then, we allow you then to update all of, add your vendors to your instance of this product. And what it will do is automatically then go in and test and match against those that are part of the banned entities. We've taken this one step further, which we're going to show you, to even be able to launch a utility that not only allows you to identify vendors, but allows you to identify all the products provided by those vendors. So it will basically reach out into your environment and identify all the basically all the assets, IT assets, the telecommunication assets, the phones, the video, the routers, and all in the environment. And we match them up against what we call the MAC address, basically the manufacturer's identifier, that will then go and match against the same MACs that are in that banned provider list. So it will instantly alert you if there's any red flags or warnings that exist. And because it's a continuous system, anytime there are updates, whether you've added something new into your environment or there's been additions to the list, it will automatically then go ahead and compare against that. And it also allows you, should you so choose, to push that process down and out to your downstream providers or vendors, which just adds another layer of significant compliance and security process, because you can then also get insight to make sure that the vendors or contractors that you're working with are also following these proper processes as well. And as I mentioned, it's a real-time solution, meaning it's constantly running and acting. So I'm going to pause here for a minute, and I'm just going to go in and give you a brief overview of the product offering itself. Sorry. Thought I had it open. And so I'm going into this SureShield platform, and I'm going to actually go and straight to our Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. Pick up a customer. And it's actually quite, for the most part, while it's quite sophisticated in the back-end nature, it's really a fairly simple process. So when you implement the solution, you'll be presented with a dashboard, basically, of your environment. And in the case of this particular Sky Services, they're not only monitoring within their own environment, which is this area that says My Network Devices, but because I was able to push this down to my downstream vendors, I'm actually able to even see the devices that might be in my downstream, in my vendor networks that I need or may need to be concerned about. So at the top of the food chain here is the list, or the data check sources of all the banned vendors. So today it's 232. As we indicated, this very likely is going to continue to grow. But if I were to just go in and take a look at this, I can get a very quick oversight view of who all those companies are, who the parent is, and what are the vendors that are part of that, or the subsidiaries that are part of that parent. That makes up the current banned vendor ecosystem. And you can see where the breakout is by the different types of parent companies. If I just wanted to see what were the ones that were in ZTE, then I would go ahead and click on that, and this side area will filter that down for me. So within here, again, it's showing me where I may have some issues and some red flags that I need to address. So I can see within my supply chain vendor group, I've got one of those suppliers that has one of these banned entities. Even within my own, I have one. And then in my network itself, I have them. So if I were to actually go into this and click, it shows me all of those assets in my network. In this case, I've clicked on everything, and 15 of those that are within here are fine. I have one that's banned. And so if I were to click on here, I can actually see who that one is. In this case, it's one that's provisioned by Huawei Tech, and it will even take me down to the MAC address and the IP so that I can direct this to the appropriate people to say, hey, this is something we need to make sure we address and eliminate. So really simple once you have it set up. And that setup process is really very, very simple. And I'll show you kind of what that is. So if you go into this area called the onboarding steps, as we mentioned, when this is deployed, you will already have on the back end those vendors that are banned. So we have the list of all of those that are in here. There's a couple of simple ways in which you can begin the process of adding your vendors. So you can either go and add them one by one. So it will basically ask you for the name of that organization, some specific detail on that. And then once that's in there, it will go ahead and automatically check against that. So anytime you may have a new entity that comes in, you can very quickly go in and add that new vendor to your 889B oversight solution. In the beginning, you might want to try to make that more rapid. And so there's also a way to go and extract a template. So basically it asks, there's a download template file that's provided. It will give you the information on what is needed in those columns and rows. And you can then come back and you can upload all those records back into the system, and it will begin that process of checking on them. Now, should you want to become even more thorough in this process, as we mentioned, there's the ability to actually go in and to a secondary step, which is downloading a scanner. And this scanner has multi-purpose. It's currently used in our security solution because it identifies assets and then allows you to run vulnerability and security scans on that. But the first step is actually identifying all the assets in the ecosystem. So this scanner it's a pretty simple process. The instructions on how to do that are quite easy. Once that scanner is downloaded, then it will not only go out and check against the vendors, but it will actually check against all the products associated with those vendors. So this is where we can identify, as we said, the IP and the MAC addresses on anything you have in your environment. So it's actually a one-step further process to make you even more assured of compliance with this act and what you need to do. And then lastly, you also have the ability to go ahead, as we mentioned, like in this environment, as I mentioned, I'm also able to look in and see the status of my downstream vendors. So you can actually ask your vendors to do the same. You basically click here and you can go ahead and then set up. So right now, this is showing me all the vendors that are in my system. And if I wanted to, then I can go ahead and add or invite folks to do the same. So I would just basically click on one of these buttons, and it's going to send out an email that will explain to them what needs to be done. And you're asking them to go ahead and run the same types of checks, and you will have information to know then, if they have done so, what the status is with their providers. So you can see, as I said, the devices in my vendor network. I can go out and look and see who they are, and I can see who my vendor is that's associated with. So in this case, I had the Centadel and the PhotoSpace vendor who services me, that we were able to identify had some banned products in there. And again, as someone who's responsible for making sure that we're in total compliance, I can then reach out to these entities and say, hey, we've noticed this. First of all, it's unsafe for you, it's unsafe for us, and we need to remove this. So that is the Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. It's very, very, as you said, I would say robust, but very, very simple to implement. And for all of those who are participating today, keep your eyes out for an email. As I mentioned, we will be sending you the content of the presentation as well as the recording, but we're also going to, invite you, should you so choose, to trial the software, and that will come in a separate email to you, and you'll just basically need to go ahead and click on that and register. And then, of course, you've got folks from SureShield that will be available to you to help you if need so in the process. But we've run a couple of these webinars, and we've had quite a bit of companies that have joined and have taken advantage of that trial. And a few that have been, many have been great, meaning that they've got the assurance that they're in compliance, but there's been a few that have also, been unpleasantly maybe surprised, or unbeknownst to them, that they had some of these things in their environment, and they were happy to know that, so they could take the proper actions and protect their business. So, what are some of the ROIs you get out of this? It helps automate the process for you. It allows you to do an even greater compliance by pushing to your downstream vendors, and by using some of those other utilities that we have, it even helps automate that real-time asset identification, because regardless of whether the smaller or the bigger you are, there's always new things that get introduced into the environment, and sometimes you may not be aware. If you have a tool that can actually help do some of that monitoring for you, and alert you if a problem arises, even better. And it will help you assure that compliance. One other thing to note is when you have run those checks, there'll be reports that will be available to you that you can use to submit to the SAM, and that will be timestamped so that if you want to update that and send that out again, you have the ability to do that anytime you run those reports. So, excuse me, just to summarize, as you know, or hopefully are now educated on, compliance with the 889B is a requirement, and to doing business with the federal government. And it will probably continue to have more teeth put in it. Like I mentioned, it will most likely, as more companies are submitting this information, and without a doubt, they will identify some that maybe didn't think they did and did. They oftentimes will put more teeth or more even oversight into it. So you can be assured it's not going to lighten up. It's probably going to get even more restrictive. And in order to comply, you need to have good processes in place to make sure you have adequate oversight. And as we've mentioned before, there's always going to be new threats, and there will be new companies added, very likely, not just those associated with the Chinese nation. And hopefully you can take advantage of leveraging technology like ours to help automate your ecosystem oversight, to assure compliance and really protect your business, and make sure that you're complying with what you need to comply with. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause. For those of you who want more information, you can certainly get in touch with us at SureShield. We are going to, as I said, offer a free trial of Integrity Shield for 889B compliance, but you can visit our website if you want to learn more about what we do at sure-shield.com, info@sure-shield.com if you want more information or you want to schedule even a further deep dive into this solution or any other solution. And with that, if you want to, we have a Q&A area that our folks are supervising right now. And it looks like that was answered. Chandi, there was a question from Christine about what were the differences between DFARS and 889 provisions. And I think Chandi has gone ahead and answered that for Christine. Okay, and yes, please go to the Q&A section if you have other questions and enter them there. I see another one coming in. They're just asking primarily how, if I'm interested in continuing to use a product after the trial, what is the pricing model for this? It's actually pretty simple. It's based upon the number of vendors and assets being monitored in your environment. It's a very nominal cost. It's around $5 a vendor or asset, and with a minimum on that subscription. It's a subscription base. It can be done either monthly or yearly. If you choose to further automate by running the scanner, it's just a nominal charge for adding that piece to it as well. And so it's really based upon the volume of vendors, and that's primarily it. The volume of vendors that we're monitoring for you in there. Let me see if there's other questions. Here's one. Is this, you mentioned that this is related, to anyone that serves the government, regardless of whether they use that technology in that service. And so, yes, that is correct. Even if what you provide is part of the contract or the subcontract you're providing to any one of these government agencies. And remember, this applies across the entire federal government, not just one particular aspect of it. But regardless of whether that technology is used in conduction of the business you're doing for them, if you have it in your environment, you're expected to remove it. So it does add another layer of complexity, because you may be doing something that has nothing to do with that type of equipment, but if that equipment is somewhere in your ecosystem, you're expected to remove it. I don't see any other questions coming across right now. So with that, we've bought you back a little time, I hope. As I mentioned, you will receive all of this in an email follow-up that will provide you the content. It will also provide you the recording, and then keep an eye out for a separate email that is an offer for you to start your free trial of Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. And with that, if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank everybody for their attendance, and please reach out to us if we can be of any further help or use to you all. All the best. Thank you.